A little cat snuck away from her family, completely alone, and what happened next left everyone speechless. Welcome to the world of Kitty. If you're new here, hit subscribe so you never miss an adventure. Kitty and her family had arrived at the beach. Mom walked alone along the shore, something she always did. Nobody quite understood why, but she never missed it. Dad stayed back with Little Biscuit, Kitty's younger sister, while Kitty spotted something incredible washed up by the waves, a perfect shining seashell. She had to show Mom. "Can I go find her?" Kitty asked. Dad looked out at the beach. Mom was just a small orange shape in the distance. "I'll be watching the whole time," he said. Kitty had never walked that far alone before, so she invented a game to make herself braver. She was a mermaid who had been given legs, just for one day. Magic legs, temporary legs, legs she had to make the most of before the sun went down. She padded across the sand, tail up, head high. The first challenge came almost immediately. A group of seagulls had gathered right in the middle of her path, completely blocking the footprints Mom had left behind. "Excuse me," Kitty said, very politely. The seagulls stared at her. They did not move. She tried again. They still didn't move. She glanced back at Dad, a tiny dot now, far away. She glanced forward at the seagulls. Then she walked straight through them anyway. Mermaids don't negotiate with seagulls. A little further ahead, she found a tidal pool full of tiny crabs scuttling in every direction. "Hello, little crab," she said, crouching down. The crab raised one claw, then disappeared sideways under a rock. Kitty kept walking. Then, a jellyfish washed up right at the edge of the water, wobbling gently in the foam. Now here's something we need to know about Kitty. She was not the kind of cat who backed down easily. She walked as close as she dared, looked the jellyfish directly in its blurry, translucent face, and said, "You can't hurt me." She stepped around it and kept going. By this point, Kitty had walked further alone than she ever had in her life. She stopped and looked back. Dad was so far away she could barely see him. She looked forward. Mom was closer now, but still not close enough to hear her if she called. And then she realized something that made her stomach drop. She couldn't go back. The seagulls had scattered, the crabs had rearranged themselves, and the wind had smoothed over most of the sand. Mom's footprints, the ones she'd been following, were almost completely gone. She was in the middle, between Dad and Mom, on her own. Here's a question for everyone watching. Drop your answer in the comments. When you were little, what's the bravest thing you ever did completely alone? Kitty stood very still and thought about it. She looked at the sand in front of her. There, faint but real, were the last remaining prints, just enough to follow. She followed the prints, one after another, and just when she thought she'd lost them completely, a pelican waddled directly into her path and stared at her with the deeply unimpressed expression that only pelicans can manage. "Excuse me, Mr. Pelican," she said. He didn't. He blinked once, slowly, then stepped aside. And there was Mom, right there, real and close and smiling. Mom said, "I'm a mermaid with legs," Kitty said. "I went past the jellyfish and the pelican." Mom crouched down and held out her arms. Kitty pressed the seashell to Mom's ear. Mom listened. "It sounds like the whole ocean," Mom said. "I know," said Kitty. They stood there for a moment, the two of them, while the waves came in and went out. Mom thought about it. "I'm not completely sure," she said. She took Kitty's paw. By the time they got into the water, Biscuit's eyes were burning from the chlorine because there were no goggles. Kitty wanted to dive for toys, but there were no toys.
And Biscuit wanted her floaties, but Dad hadn't brought them, so she had to stay on the steps, staring at the rest of the pool like it was a country she wasn't allowed to enter. Biscuit asked hopefully, watching the shadow shrink. "It'll grow," Dad said confidently. It shrank. Then Hunger arrived. "Hello, Hungry." "Right, yes," Dad checked the bag. "No food." "No," said both girls simultaneously, in the specific tone that means the conversation is not over. What followed was a negotiation that Dad was not going to win. Biscuit refused to get out. Kitty refused to let Biscuit refuse. Biscuit, once out, could not dry off because there were no towels, so she stood dripping on the hot tiles, making a sound that was somewhere between a complaint and a small siren. Dad stood there, surrounded by two cold, squinting, hungry, unsunscreened, ungoggles, untoy-having kittens, and accepted the truth. And then, Mom appeared at the gate. She had the bag, the real bag, the one with the sunscreen, the goggles, the pool toys, the floaties, the towels, the snacks, and the hats. "You forgot a few things," she said. "Several things," said Dad. "All of the things," said Kitty. Mom set everything out. Goggles went on, floaties went on, sunscreen went on, toys went in the water with a satisfying series of splashes. For the next hour, the pool was everything a pool should be. Biscuit dove after toys she could now actually see. Kitty challenged herself to swim the full length, something she hadn't done before. Dad, now fully humbled, cheered from the shallow end.
Mom looked at the sunscreen, the towels, the goggles, the food. "Every single one," she said. Biscuit considered this seriously. "Okay," she said, and dove back in. The afternoon wore on. The shade moved around. Everyone got hungry at the exact right moment because they were snacks. Nobody burned because they were sunscreen. Nobody cried about chlorine because they were goggles. Dad sat on the edge of the pool with his feet in the water and watched his family and said absolutely nothing because there was nothing useful left to say. Eventually, they packed up and went home. Towels dry, bellies full. One small kitten already asleep in the back seat, clutching a toy fish. And the pool sat quiet in the late afternoon sun, waiting patiently for next time. And next time, Dad would bring the bag. Probably.